Jackson Morning Show. We are on the clock. Georgia Ford is not with us, but we have Pastor Anthony Galloway and Dr. Carl Mack, as well as DJ Exclusive. Good morning, gentlemen.
Good morning.
Good morning.
It is good to have all of you here with us. And in a moment, we're going to be joined by State Senator Fort from the state of Georgia. And we're going to be discussing with him the Economic Bill of Rights, the same Bill of Rights that we were talking about with Nina Turner and not pastor. I just, it's something you always make people doctors or pastors in the black church world. Professor Harvey K. and Alan Minsky, they're making a move on encouraging and pushing this government to give us an economic bill of rights, ensuring a certain level of living, because in this country, it is very difficult to get ahead. As we were talking about everything we talked about in the last segment, it really made me think of the different ways that this system has of choking us out. And I want to just read a report from CNN. Renters are losing hope of owning houses as it hits housing prices hit record highs. CNN is reporting that the U.S. real estate market has stayed hot. Many renters are starting to doubt that they'll ever own a home of their own. According to a recent survey by the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, an average of just 43.3% of renters believe they'll own a home in their future. In 2021, 51.6% of renters were hopeful they'd own a home eventually. And in 2021, 51.6% rather of renters were hopeful that they own a home. And this is rooted now in the increased prices of home. We understand that the markets go up and down, Brother Mack, but there's something interesting happening now. I don't know if it's happening in your various sides of the country, but I can attest, and James, I know you can, for Atlanta. The market there is just out of control. Houses are selling within hours. People are overbidding by hundreds of thousands of dollars. Dr. Mack, I heard one house got over $100,000 more than what they were asking within 6 days of closing. So it's a very hot market. So it's good for some, but for the average person out here, it's becoming more and more difficult. And that's just one. I mean, there's a litany of ways where we are squeezed in this system. I want to ask all of you going across the room your thoughts about this, but really in terms of everything else that's happening, because I think a key component in the crumbling of our democracy is the level of desperation that a lot of Americans experience. Now, I'm not one, Pastor Galloway, because I heard you earlier say that you have a robust critique of both parties. So do I. I think everybody on this screen does. But there is a level of economic despair that is directly associated with policies that are campaigned upon and bragged upon, but yet there seems to be people who run headlong into it. Let me make it plain. How is it that a party that has made it clear that they don't want anything except for our economic despair still gets the votes of people who need the most help? Some of the poorest people in this country need the most help, Pastor Galloway, but they are still running into the hands of a party. They trade their bigotry in exchange for their economic despair. What are your thoughts on all of this?
I'm sorry, we said it with the historical context. Let's keep it in the historical context, right? Slavery did not work for the vast majority of whites in the poor whites in the South who did not own slaves. Right, and yet they were inculcated to vote against their very own interest.
That's right.
Bacon's Rebellion was another example. Bacon's Rebellion, everybody united together to revolt against what was happening to be another ruling class space where the vast majority of wealth was being taken by a certain group of folks, and folks violently led by Bacon to take that back violently. And what did they do? They instituted policies that put white overseers over, to separate again against their own interest, because all it did is reprime that same pump. So this is not new, unfortunately, in the historical space, right? And we're talking about places where folks continue to vote in this way, and they see their own gaps continue to increase. We often talk about the black-white wealth gaps in urban context. What about the white gaps that are happening in some of our rural spaces that folks just don't seem to align, But I'm saying this from the space of the Democratic Farm Labor Party, ran rampant in in Minnesota. We have a huge white farm labor, pro union space that is now eroding into this same thing, where those same values that were true and held in 1970 and 1980, 1988 in particular, when we had the plateau and the huge rising of some of these disparities, especially educationally, those same values that were touted there being worked against by the same folks who are even a part of those movements, to the tune of the policy that you're talking about. So unfortunately, this historical pattern has been present for years.
And to add just a little bit more to the historical perspective, Pastor, the thing that you're talking about is, in history is known as Bloody Kansas. And going back to what AOC said January 6th was a trial run. If you don't think America has had practice in trial runs, Bloody Kansas is an absolute perfect example of it. Because Bloody Kansas was a war, a civil war within the Kansas territory over free labor or free soil. So you had some folks who wanted to take the Kansas territory and bring slavery into it. Poor white folks understood that no, if you bring free labor into this, then that's going to hurt me. So this is going to be free soil. So they had a mini civil war from 1854 to 1861. Keep in mind, right after 1861, that's when you had right during that time, that's when you had the Civil War. That's when you had the real thing to take place. And then even if you go back and you listen to Dr. King was talking to poor white folks too.
Right.
And while you sitting there thinking it's okay to have your foot on my neck, they got their foot on yours as well. So to that point, these things happen. But now, not only is it in housing where we're seeing housing prices skyrocket. Gentlemen, I'm listening to some of my friends around the country to tell me about rent prices. That the folks who own these places where they're renting, they're jacking their prices up on. Some people are telling me that they're paying upwards of $3,000 for rent in a place that's half the size of my house.
Yep, right. Dr. Mack, that's real.
Yeah.
And I'll say this. I wanted to jump in real quick before I jumped off to get my coffee. That dream of owning a house for me, like a lot of people are saying in the chat, I canceled that dream about 10 years ago. Honestly, truly, because at the end of the day, I don't make enough money according to anybody that does anything with houses. Don't make enough. And then with student loans and everything else, at one point, my credit was good enough where I could have done it. Like when I owned a house originally with my ex-husband, everything was good and we owned it. But the thing was, because I had a judgment from my student loans on my credit, my name couldn't go on the deed at all. So at this point, I'm just like, I know my credit is shot to hell. That judgment is still on there. Yeah, I'm going to be renting for the rest of my life probably, unless I buy a house full out cash.
And if you do get a house, DJ, it's got to go to some place where population is scarce, because everybody around. And when you talk about the dominoes being in effect, the same thing, Ben, when you talk about what happens economically to us as a people, and I'm not saying just black folks, I'm saying Americans across the board. Think about that from what DJ has just said about student loans. Student loans is an absolute crisis in this country. When you take a look at that. So now, just imagine you take two people. And Tina Turner's song comes into mind. What's love got to do with it? You take two people who have gone to college, and all of a sudden they say they're in love and they want to get married. Both of them college educated. What is the loan? What is their debt just based on student loans when they start that relationship? And now they want to go out and they want to have this grandiose wedding. Now that adds to it. Then they done graduated. They got to get new cars. They got to try to get a house. Look at the mountain of debt that your love has to survive. And I've always said there ain't no romance without finance.
Dr. Mack just said a whole lot that is so doggone true. Just like if y'all would only knew everything that Dr. Mack said it's exactly what it is. It like for real.
You lighten my pastor antennas up, because if you lay the things out, I think this is in pursuit of a non-collectivist way of life. So when I think about when my wife and I moved in with my parents, right, and we stayed there and we collectivized our money. We collectivized our resource. If I get rid of this need to be distant in this big palace around me, and I move back to a space where I was perfectly fine living in close quarters with folks. Right now, there's part of our life I had to do it with little resource, but I also have lived that experience with resource, and the amount of things that we were able to do, the amount of clearing of the mortgage line that they were able to do. We are now, because some of my family members pooled together, lived together, collectivized together, we've got a plot of family land that we can build on, and we want to save money to it. It's not a thought. We come together, we live in there, we make it so that we can save them ducats, and now all of a sudden we're putting money not back into somebody else's hands, but I'm buying land from my uncle. I'm buying land from my grandmother. I'm like so. I think there's also an opportunity, going back to the institution building, for us to pull back into some of our collectivist approaches and thinking, and to start asking the question: how do I work outside? Not outside necessarily in the legal space, although I don't have a problem with some of that. Jesus was illegal too, but if
according to
we
man,
can
he was.
shift, right. He was challenging power. He was, feeding 5,000 people and making them not pay taxes to Rome. That's a political statement. I'm fine with that, but there's an opportunity here for us to rely on that ancestral that has gotten us through so many things, to start to think about how we do that in a different way. If we don't get compelled to, as what you were saying, Dr. Mack, if we don't get compelled to have to have this giant wedding. I have a friend who got married at a brew pub and said, everybody come and leave some dollars at the front door. Not only did they have a cheaper wedding, but folks came, had tossed some brews back. The officiating was great. They still had a Christian message, which I loved. It was awesome. And then they left with $5,000 in cash in hand.
Yes.
Right. So I think there's some opportunity here as we see that the systems that we've built around, that are centered around greed and debt and borrowing and all that stuff, don't work for us.
Right.
This is the time for to reclaim some of our collectivist identity.
And Pastor, even when you talk about events like that, like weddings, the same thing with children's birthdays. All of a sudden, now children's birthdays have to be this grandiose event. And I've tried to say to my friends, listen, I have I got two sons. One's 18, one's 15. From the moment that they were born, even before they were born, the woman that I said, I wanted you to be the mother, I want you to be my baby mama, my ex-wife, right? We were married for 16 and a half years, but she understood before we started procreation that the moment our children get a Social Security number, we will squirrel away every paycheck, we will squirrel away money. And so now, and I said, by the time our children turn 18, I need $180 some odd thousand in each one of them's college fund. And we just squirreled away because the law says this, the law of money. The Karl Mack law. If you ain't got a whole lot of money, you better hope you got a whole lot of time.
Come on.
If you ain't got a whole lot of time, you damn sure better have a whole lot of money. So what I've said to my friends now, who, when they have children and they want to talk about, how do I save for their college fund? I said, well, first and foremost, when you have a birthday, tell your friends not to buy them toys and all that. Our children got more toys than you know what to do with. How about just dropping $10 into their 529 plan?
Come on.
There it is.
Let those little things, let those little collective things. If you got 20 people coming to the wedding and everybody drops in $10 or $20, because Lord knows you're going to spend a lot more than that when you run and all the other places you do, renting these inflatable balloons outside your place, and you got camels and donkeys and everything. Come on, man. Let's get back to the simplicity of collectiveness and let that amount of money over time, because there's a relation. And you want to talk about love. Romeo and Juliet ain't it. The greatest love affair is the relationship between time and money.
All right. Speaking of time,
that'll preach.
Right. Speaking of time and speaking of money, I want to bring into the conversation Georgia State Senator Vincent Fort. He is running for Congress in Georgia's 13th congressional district, and he's here to discuss campaigning, not only his campaign but your work on the 21st Century Economic Bill of Rights. You've been working with Professor Harvey Kaye and Alan Linsky. Senator Fort, thank you so much for joining us this morning. How are you?
Good. I'm very well. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Pleasure's ours. We have the full house of gentlemen. They have Dr. Carl Mack, DJ Exclusive, and Pastor Anthony Galloway, all distinguished gentlemen from different parts of the country. And we're all engaged in a conversation that I think is pertinent to your work. We're talking about the struggle, the financial struggle. We're talking about people who have to live paycheck to paycheck and what it is that we can do innovatively on our own side in terms of collectivism. But in terms of policy, a lot of these things are 100% policy decisions. Tell us about your work as it pertains to the Economic Bill of Rights.
Well, I've been talking directly with Alan Minsky, watching, as a matter of fact, watch part of the program that you had with them. So this issue of economic rights is absolutely critical. First, we, particularly African Americans, we have to understand that we need to move some of these economic issues from being an issue or being a privilege to a right. I believe that healthcare is a human right, and therefore, in my campaign, I'm talking probably more than anything else about healthcare. When COVID hit, the 13th district, which is outside of Atlanta, west and south of Atlanta, it was devastating. Some of the zip codes in my district were some of the most devastated in the state of Georgia by COVID. And guess what? Just a couple of weeks ago was announced that one of the hospitals in South Fulton, where the 13th district is in partially, it's closing down. A hospital closing down is probably the worst thing that can happen
Especially
to a community.
In that area,
Absolutely.
there's not enough hospitals as it is in that area.
Absolutely. So you had that combination of a COVID pandemic plus a hospital closing down. And that's why I think it's time, more so now than ever, that we have guaranteed universal health care. No deductibles, no co-payments, but straight up guaranteed health care. We are the only industrialized country in the world without it. So these issues of economic rights that Roosevelt talked about 80 years ago, that we are starting to talk about in the rebirth of the progressive movement here in this country, is an absolutely critical conversation.
Dr. Mack.
No, I'm Senator, first of all, in the state of Georgia, obviously, and I just want to ask you about your campaign right now. Because of what happened in the state of Georgia being flipped like that, what are you seeing around voter suppression that you think would make your bid to represent us challenging?
Yeah, I served in the Georgia State Senate for 21 years, beginning in 1997 to 2021. And voter suppression is not an advent just of 2020, 2021. When the Republicans took over the Georgia State Legislature in about 2002, 2003, and 4, I saw the Republicans start that wave of voter suppression in the early 2000s. As a matter of fact, I believe Georgia, if not Indiana, Georgia was the first state to pass voter ID laws in the early 2000s. And I remember the rock and roll fights we had on the floor of the state Senate, pushing back against that. What has happened in the last couple of years is that the Republicans have taken it to another level with their voter suppression, exact match on absentee ballots. Your signature has to match exactly as it appears in the records that they're using to compare absentee ballots. It's just a way to reject more and more people's absentee ballots. all the way over to things like making it illegal to give someone water who's standing in line in the Georgia heat. So, voter suppression is absolutely critical issue. And I'll be honest with you, all of our economic rights, whether it be healthcare or jobs, whatever it is, are contingent upon our political rights, the ability to vote. So one of the things that, I'm going to I was going to say advocate for, but I'm going to fight for. My history in the Georgia legislature and in the community that I serve is as a activist, as a fighter. And one of the, along with universal health care, the issue of voter suppression is absolutely paramount. Because without our voting rights, we cannot implement our economic rights.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Pastor Galloway, I want you to get in there.
Yeah, I was so I love this idea, not this idea, but the shift in language to right. And I think that this is something that I'm in Minnesota, in particular the northern part of Minnesota. So this idea of a right to healthcare. You when you said economic rights, you named healthcare. It encompasses a lot. I'm curious, as you make this case, what all are you identifying as a right? I heard you say healthcare. I heard you say, in terms of employment, but housing seems like it would be in that space as well. All of these affect the economic life. So can you kind of, because I want to use that language because I think it's absolutely essential. In South Africa, where I studied for a while, one of the constitutional rights is the right to a house. Now they've had to fight for the quality of that house, absolutely, right? But there's not a question in that regard. As you've already put forward in many other industrialized parts of the world, healthcare is no longer questioned as something that you have a right or access to. And so I love that. Can you articulate all the things that you see that need to become a right in terms of economic bill?
Absolutely. One is affordable housing, as you said. One issue that I've worked on, I'm a former college teacher, taught at Morehouse College as well as Morris Brown College for many years. I've walked in my first college classroom as a professor in 1982 when I was 26 years old. And so I believe that the right to higher education, not just K through 12, but higher education is a human right. Every young person, every person ought to be able to get as much education as their skills and talents allow. If you're smart enough and ambitious enough, we should not say that the only education you get is through 12th grade. So one of the elements of the Build Back Better plan was free 2-year college or training. During my time in the legislature, I fought for money for two-year schools in the city of Atlanta, Atlanta Technical College and Atlanta Metropolitan College, funneled $45 million into those two schools to build buildings so they could offer better programs, better certificates, whether it be radiology certificate or a dental assistant certificate. So that's been a focus of my career. We really, New Mexico is advancing on this issue, by the way. They have passed free public college. And that's something that I think ought to be a right. When the Build Back Better plan did not go forward, that issue of free 2-year college really bothered me that part did not pass.
But Senator, let me jump in and ask this question when it comes to just education, just because all of these are just huge efforts, right? And so one of the things, having sat on a board of trustees of a college, one of the things that I've come to
electrical
understand,
work, carpentry, etc. So I don't want this to be a narrow thing that you can only get a quote unquote liberal arts degree. We need to educate our young people, particularly children of color. So we need to establish that right to a higher education in our country. And then finally is the environment. The environment. I'm supportive of the Green New Deal, but I connected to this issue of jobs and job training, saying that particularly children of color need to be trained to deal with the issue of our environment, to retrofit residential as well as commercial properties for to deal with the environmental effects of climate change.
Right.
And Senator, I'm not sure if you all can hear me now.
Yes, we got you now.
So Senator, if I just go back and just focus on education for a minute, because all of these issues are just absolutely huge issues, right? And so if the problem, the challenge that I see, and having sat on a board of
I'm not hearing y'all.
Okay. Well, we lost. You know what, Dr. Mack? Let's hold it here.
Sure.
Senator Fort, we're gonna have to get you back on another time to talk a little bit more about this. We're coming up at the top of the hour already. I want to thank you for coming on and talking about this economic bill of rights. We definitely are going to support that. I also want to thank Pastor Anthony Galloway of St. Mark AME in Duluth, Minnesota. Thank you always, brother, for coming. And then Dr. Carl Mack. Thank you so much for taking your time this morning to come out. Gentlemen, thank you so much for all that you do. We're going to go to a quick break. And when we come back, like it or not, it's getting ready to go down. We'll be back right after this.